I always appreciate that you all pray for me, and I know that you do. If you ever need to pray out loud in the middle of service, like, help him, Jesus, you can just feel, I might fall off the stage in the front, but because I'd be so shocked, but it's a good shock. It's a good kind of shock. When I was about 6 years old, Mom decided I needed to learn to play the piano. So I went to Miss Knight, and I took 2 years of piano lessons. Don't ask me to play anything, even chopsticks anymore. I'm not even sure what keys they are. I know what all the names of the keys are. But one of the things you had to do at the end of every year, which I found exceptionally daunting, was there was a recital. And when you did the recital, you weren't allowed to have music. You had to play it by heart. I don't know how it is with you, but playing things it helped me out in life. Eventually, I was in the marching band, and you can't be marching around, especially with a trombone, sliding a slider in and out, a couple of good glissandos, and you could take out a trumpet player if you're trying to look at music and play it at the same time. That's just a heads up, If you see a trombone player coming towards you, marching, and they're looking at music and not the slide, you could be in for a world of hurting. That's all I can say is, hope your medical insurance is paid up. So, learning by heart is something that's really important. We've just completed a series about apprenticing with Jesus, and it's really the intent of calling it apprentices. Some people have said, well, James, isn't this a discipleship series? It is, but the word disciple means absolutely nothing to you. It means absolutely nothing. How often do you walk around and say to somebody, hey, I'm a disciple? That makes me think of a motorcycle gang. That's, in all honesty, except in a Christian context, the average person has no idea what you're saying. But when you say I'm an apprentice, they get a sense of that. They might have some kind of image that they saw on television about what that means, but there's also the sense of what it looks like when somebody is an apprentice. I have had electricians come to our house where an apprentice was working alongside of a master electrician or a journeyman electrician. They worked together because the apprentice was learning. And so we did that series about learning. But now we have gone through the death and resurrection of Jesus, and what's going to happen after there's no more Jesus to watch? After we can't apprentice by walking around with a living, breathing, bodily man who is there all the time. What's going to happen to the church? That's the big question. For me, you get to the end of the Gospels and you ask yourself, okay, we got a dead Jesus. Oh, we got to raise Jesus. Woo, that's good. Now what? Now what? If you read the 21st chapter of the Gospel of John, the fishermen had gone back to fishing. They weren't even doing anything. They were like hanging out fishing because, hey, that's what they thought. Maybe, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do? This Jesus resurrection thing is cool, but I don't know what to do. So the truth is we got to make that next step. Now, if you're ever reading the Gospels and you want to figure out what did the next step begin to look like, then you begin to read the Acts of the Apostles, because it's the history of the church. From Pentecost, which was last week, when the Spirit fell upon the church, to what did they figure out what to do? And for me, there are 4 basics that the church was called to do, and those 4 basics are all found in Acts chapter 2, verse 42. And that is not Acts. So, and I marked all sorts of pages, but Acts was not one of them. You can see it in your printed update. It's printed in your printed update. I know where Acts is. It's in the book right after John. And I know where chapter 2 is. It's still in here. Oh, there we go. The believers. Help him, Jesus. See? Wayne's already got it down. Help him, Jesus. He's going to find it. They did. Chapter 2, verse 42 in Acts says this. The believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. That's this week. Next week is they devoted themselves to the community. That's week 2. Week 3 is they devoted themselves to shared meals. And the last one is they devoted themselves to their prayers. That's what we're going to be talking about for the next 4 weeks. I find that one verse is key to what the early church practiced. If we do not learn to practice anything else but those 4 things, being devoted to those things, then we will be a basic church. And by basic, sometimes you say it's kind of basic. Basic sometimes means, is meant derogatorily. I do not mean it in a derogatory fashion. For us, if we can just keep the basics, we'll stay focused. So that first one right there, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. Well, let's just take a moment before I have a second passage I want to share with you. That passage is marked, or at least it was when I got up here. Who knows? We'll find out. What were the apostles teaching? What were those guys teaching? Because, I'm so used to when I start to write a curriculum for people to study, I got the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. I've got the New Testament, the Christian Bible. The apostles didn't have any of it. They had the Hebrew Bible. That's all they had. There was no written down testament right after Jesus. The earliest writings were Paul's letters. And Paul's letters were probably not written until somewhere around 40 or 50. 15, 20, 30 years after Jesus' death is when we get the first writings. You and I could not imagine going to school where somebody didn't hand us a textbook. Even if it was ancient and falling apart, we can't imagine not having a textbook to study. They didn't have a textbook. They had the teachings of the apostles. And when they say that, they mean literally. They mean we came and we sat and we listened to those people. We listened to what they had to say. And we watched them live what they had learned from apprenticing with Jesus. And that's why this week, devoting themselves to the teachings of the apostles, it makes complete sense as a nice transition from the Apprenticing Series. What are you going to do when you no longer have the physical, bodily Jesus walking around with you? We are going to look at some other people and see what they look like when they are following Jesus. You look at them, you say, okay, well, that looks pretty Jesus-y. Oh, I don't know. Is that Jesus-y? That doesn't feel Jesus-y. It didn't feel Jesus-y to me. And now, the danger is here. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time judging each other about this thing. Let me just tell you what. I've got more than enough logs in my eye to be plucking splinters out of yours. That's not what I need to be doing. Jesus already told a wonderful parable about that, so I'm not going to try to pluck any splinters. But the truth is, you can see it when it's reflected in that other person. So the apostles' teaching, they watched them, they listened to them. They said, listen, they talk about love all the time. Do they act like they love? They talk about healing all the time. Do they bring healing to people? They talk about transformation, about a whole new life, a whole new way of thinking, heart and mind. Is their heart and mind changed? Do they look at people differently? These things they're talking about, is it making an impact on their lives, or are they just talking the talk? Because sometimes I think that's what's missing in the basic church. The basic church needs to walk the walk that it's talking. If we're going to say we're all about loving Jesus, we just need to be loving Jesus and loving each other and loving God, loving our neighborhood, loving anybody we can get our eyes and our words on. With everything that we are and all that we have, we're going to love. If we're going to talk about that, then that's what we need to be doing. Otherwise, let's stop talking about it. Let's just hang out together and enjoy fun songs and stuff like that, but let's not pretend to be the church anymore, because a basic church devotes themselves, and this is where I think that whole learning by heart thing really matters. Learning by heart didn't just mean that I got it inside my mind or in the middle of my chest. Whereas there's this thumping thing that if it stops thumping, we're in a little trouble. Or I am. You might not be, but I would be if it stops thumping. Learning by heart means that it becomes so much a part of me that I do it. I used to wonder I was never a sports guy. Let me just tell you, I could not play sports. I know some of you could. My son played some nice baseball. Ultimately for varsity for TC. And then he said, I never want to play baseball again, except for fun. After you've squatted for a number of years and your knees are shot, you're like, okay, I'm done. And you get that. But I used to watch them practice the same thing over and over again. You go to a baseball game and it's like use both hands to get the ball, stop the ball. You practice like that. That's as much baseball as you're going to get from me, Throw it, and you throw with your whole body because then you get more centripetal force. They don't tell you that when you're doing it, but you learn that, and then when you learn it in physics, you're like totally cooled out. But the bottom line is, it starts to become muscle memory. It starts to become a part of who you are, so that when the ball comes to you, you don't have to think, okay, I've got this ball. It was just hit by that guy on the other team. What am I supposed to do with this? It just comes into your hand and you just throw it. If the play is at first, you throw it to first. If you throw it to second, you throw it to third. The play's at home. You know where you're going because it's muscle memory. And if we're going to learn to be Christians by heart, devoting ourselves to the teachings of the apostles, it's got to be so much muscle memory, so much mental and heart memory, that when the moment comes, we got to live into it. It comes. It just comes out. We got to practice loving. First of all, practice loving the easy people. I don't know if there are any of those, but if you can find a couple of easy people to love those people. Then maybe you step up to the slightly more challenging people to love. If you've been married long enough, perhaps your spouse. Or Linda could tell you. There are some big stories. She is really practicing love every single day. A lot. Mainly patience. Maybe it's not just love, it's patience too. But the truth is, you put it into practice so that when it happens, you're ready. If you let your first response always come out your mouth, come out your mind, when somebody cuts you off in traffic, and you say Jesus Christ, only it's not really a special prayer. It's an exclamation of dissatisfaction with that person. And I don't want to go to traffic because that's such a petty thing. But the truth is, if it comes out there, it's going to come out when somebody else does anything that bothers you. Somebody else is in line. Somebody else, your team isn't winning. You start throwing things at the television set. Soon enough, you have to buy a new television set because it's smashed, unless you throw like I do. And you miss the TV every time. You can't even hit the broadside of a barn, no matter how hard you throw it. But for most of us, the way we begin to act becomes muscle memory. And that's why Paul says this in his letter to the Philippians, chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. From now on, brothers and sisters, if something is excellent, and if anything is admirable, focus your thoughts on these things. All that is true, all that is holy, all that is just, all that is pure, all that is lovely, and all that is worthy of praise. Practice these things. Whatever you learned, received, heard, or saw in us, the God of peace will be with you. Now it's not marked anymore. Now it is again. Practice, let your mind dwell on those things. Let your practice reflect those things. I recently read a book. I do a lot of reading, which is good. And some of it is, here, and some of it's in other things. But I was reading this book about the mind and the way the mind works. And if you immerse your mind in hate and ugliness, that's what merges out of you all the time. That's what whole pathways form in your brain, and they just keep working. They just keep working. So everything is a negative. Oh, I can't believe I didn't get my due. I didn't get what I deserved. Everything is falling apart. The world is coming down. Look at the sky, broken, and Chicken Little, and we're all running around. Or you can practice something else. And I want to tell you, I told you this before, it's brain chemistry. Your brain can immediately grasp onto negative thoughts. It takes 15 seconds of focus for you to retain a positive thought, for it to have effect on you. I don't know why our brains work like that. Maybe we're problem solvers, so the negative comes right in there, and we've got to focus on how am I going to solve this? How am I going to solve this? And then it gets all even more negative. But we have to dwell on the positive. That's why Paul says, dwell on it, dwell on it, dwell on it, dwell on it, dwell on what is excellent, what is good, what is admirable, what we want the very best of. Dwell on that. So as I read about that, I also read another book, and that book was about ways to immerse your mind in positive things. Now, this guy who wrote it happened to be an Eastern philosopher, but he was writing about the Beatitudes. Of all things, he was writing about the Beatitudes, which we're doing a series on this summer, at the end of this series, after prayer. And Whitney's preaching the first sermon about poor in spirit. Not that I'm putting any pressure on him, but it's going to be excellent. I can just tell. So, short and excellent. You don't have to worry about Whitney chasing squirrels like James, apparently. So I'll get up right after him and chase some squirrels for you just so you can see. It won't feel like you're out of place. I'm kidding, of course. But the truth is, he talked about how he gets his mind to stay on positive things. So, for a while I was encouraging you to pray St. Francis's prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Goes on like that. So finally I decided this would be the prayer I prayed the very first thing in the morning. As soon as I open my eyes, sometimes before I even open my eyes, I pray, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love, etc., all the way to the end. Last thing I pray before I go to sleep at night, I make sure I make it all the way through. My dreams have just changed. The kinds of things I think about and dream. I haven't had really, I've had some weird bad dreams, but that was because I was taking some serious allergy medicine over the last couple of days so I could still speak to you, and you mix NyQuil with some other allergy medicines, and the next thing you know, those dreams you are flying on a Pegasus somewhere, and it's going down, and you're underwater, and you're breathing the water for some reason, and they're mermaids, and you don't know who they are, but they look like people you've seen in your life, but they're poking. Okay, enough. That was a squirrel. They were poking you with those little tridents. And then you immediately think of Navy SEALs because the tridents in the sea. In any case, so cut it off. Marge gave me the signal. Where's the squirrel? No one is holding up the squirrel. I've lost it. This is really, I tried to give you a job. Somebody has to hold the squirrel every week. So as I've begun to sort of immerse my mind in more positive thinking, my dreams have changed. The way that I engage people changed. And I find I still do. I have negativity. I will see somebody and I might make a judgment of one way or another. They do something that I don't think is really the right thing. And I just have a simple bring back for me. And that bring back is I breathe in, Lord Jesus Christ, and I let go, have mercy. And as soon as I think of Jesus, it takes me to, and sometimes I have to say it several times. Sometimes more than one or two. Sometimes more than 50 or 60. But eventually, my mind gets back into a positive place. Now, you may say, that's just a game you're playing with yourself, James. And maybe it is. But it sure lets me see the world in a different way. And it doesn't let me chase after the negative. As soon as I catch myself, as soon as that inner voice says something negative, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy. And I start to bring myself back over, from the dark side, whatever that side is, Anger and fear takes us to the dark side. That kind of, I would probably be Darth Vader. I would be right over there, the red lightsaber. But we're not going there. Letting it go. What is your mind dwelling on? Are you really devoted? Are you devoted to the teachings of the apostles? You're fortunate. You are fortunate. We are fortunate that after 50 or 60 years, they kind of distilled the very best of the teachings, and they made it Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, so we can read about Jesus' life. And John even says in the end of chapter 20, he said, there was a heck of a lot more I could have written down. He didn't say exactly like that. He said it in Koine Greek or whatever, but who cares? He said, there was a lot more I could have written down, but I just told you enough so you could believe. That's all I needed to do was tell you enough you could believe. As we distill our thoughts down to a devotion to what God wants from each one of us, is it going to be positive? Because when we devote our hearts to the teachings of the apostles, to what Jesus wants us to know, the room for negativity is slowly moved. Now let me just give you one warning. This is an important warning. Jesus was harshest with religious people. So if you find yourself judging irreligious people to make yourself feel better about how religious you are, you have joined a club that I don't think you want to be a part of. The ones that Jesus called out. In fact, sometimes he called them, whitewashed tombs. Essentially, it still contains foul, stinking death. You open up the door, bad news. You don't want to be in that club. You want to be in the club that dwells on the positive things. Whatever is admirable, whatever is positive, whatever is good, whatever is honorable. Let your mind dwell on those things. So when you're working on learning by heart what it means to follow Jesus, start with the simple things. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. What does that look like for you? In practical ways. It's a wonderful, beautiful, I just love God with all that I am. Oh, it's so sweet. Cotton candy clouds. Oh, look at that one. Pink. Oh, it tastes so delicious. Just get out of that. Right now. Snap away from that bad stuff. Well, maybe not cotton candy. That's pretty good. But what does it look like to love God? If you really love somebody, what do? You bring them flowers? Do you think God wants some flowers? I don't know. Bring some flowers for God. Maybe smell the flowers God made outside. I don't know. And appreciate them for the gift that they are. Recognize God has given you stuff all the time. The air we're breathing right now. What does it look like to love the Lord your God with all that you are? Your heart, soul, mind, and strength. In one of the Olympics, and they wrote Chariots of Fire about Eric Liddell, who competed, and he wouldn't compete on Sunday because he was a Christian and he didn't believe in running on Sunday. But he said, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. I feel God's pleasure. What do you feel God's pleasure when you do? Because that's the way you love God. When you do that thing. And love your neighbor. And guess what? You can't love God and not love your neighbor. I'm sorry. If you think you can, you're living a lie. That's what 1 John would tell me. If you think you love God, if you say that you love God and you hate your neighbor, you're a liar. So if you're going to devote yourself, get rid of the negativity, the need to judge somebody else, to measure yourself by someone else's standards. Let God be the measuring rod for your life. Listen to what God wants, the positive. And as you learn new things, do those new things. Practice those new things because it becomes muscle memory. Nobody's on. First batter's up. Hits the ball to you. What are you going to do? It was a grounder. You picked it up. Are you going to throw it to first? You're going to throw it sidearm? You're going to throw it over? Whatever. It doesn't matter. It's muscle memory and you do it. When somebody says something negative to you, what is your response? Oh, what an idiot you are. Oh, nope, that's not your response. It's not your response. Your response is maybe to breathe or maybe to count to 10. I don't know. But you don't have to be drawn into the negativity the world feeds you. You can be an example of light. Devote yourselves to the teachings of the apostles. Learn all that you can. Practice all that you can. Be all that you can be. Because that's the beginning of the basics. We don't need anybody else who's memorized Scripture but can't live it. We need people who really live, walk the walk, and talk the talk. That's one of the things I got as I read this week's passage. Next week we'll be taking a look at what does it mean that the believers devoted themselves to the community. What does that look like? What does it look like to be devoted to the community? You can imagine for yourself this week. If you have some questions or thoughts that you want me to throw into the sermon, shoot me an email. Can't hurt.